Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 83 of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. As always, I hope you're doing well. I just wrapped up a long and intense 3.5 month training at Yoga at my studio. And these trainings are offered once in a couple of years because it's a huge undertaking, both for the teacher and the student. And apart from that, I run the studio, the dance studio, and I teach. So it's been a full season. It's been a full couple of months. And I've been craving a break just because it's been nonstop. And that's kind of what brings me to my next update. Okay. I have moved my teaching yoga to beginners course to start in June. I felt that this was the best decision because when I offer a training, I'm all in. I mean, I don't cut any corners, whether it's content creation, making videos, structuring the course, doing alumni sessions, making manuals, writing the content. So in case May didn't work out for you, now it's in June, and I have all the details at mindfulyogateachers.com/beginners YTT. I know some of you have emailed me and asking for the next date, as in when this training is offered again. And to be honest, I don't plan like that. Okay. I only think one training at a time and not more than that. For me, it's not a question of how many trainings do I churn out every year, but it really comes down to what I feel is needed and what I feel I am capable of and what I have really done work for to offer it to others. So now the new dates of the training, it starts on June 10th. It's the weekend of June 10th and the weekend of June 24th. It's live. It's also, you can get access to all the recordings. There are summary videos. There's a detailed manual. There are alumni sessions. And again, if you are interested in exploring more details about this training, it's at mindfulyogateachers.com/beginners YTT. It's a slightly longer intro than usual, but I just wanted to get everything out of the way here. My Mindful Yoga Teachers Club meets again at the end of this month. That's my online monthly mentorship and support community for yoga teachers. If you feel like you need a little bit of support, you need answers for questions you have, and you don't want to break the bank paying for personal time with a yoga mentor, then just consider the Mindful Yoga Teachers Club. You can join for as little as $16 a month, no strings attached, and you can cancel anytime as well. So again, we meet the last Friday of every month. So depending on when you're listening to this, we're meeting on April 29th. Okay. And lastly, if you find value in what I do here on the podcast and you appreciate the conversations we have, then please take a moment to leave a review. I know a lot of you hear me say this every time and then you're just like, I'll do it later, but it really will help. Rather, it's the only way to get this type of content in front of other yoga teachers and students who are looking for this, right? And if you want to, in a small way, make your own impact, right, in making authentic yoga conversations a part of the norm in the yoga world, then please take a minute of your time to leave us a review. Okay. And Apple has made it so easy to do this. And you can even take the link of every episode you like itself and text it to your yoga alumni or a couple of your yoga friends. It always means a lot to me when you take the time to do this. And I know that it helps the guests also really see that their work is resonating with you. Okay. I feel like every conversation on this podcast is literally a course that is worth paying for. And I know I'm saying that myself, but it's really over the years, couple of years that we've been doing this, it's a continuing education resource. Okay. So a little bit of your support will help us go a long way. Okay. And then one last thing here before we start today's show, I rebooted my YouTube channel. So go give a follow to Aham Yoga on YouTube. I'm creating, you'll see asana videos there, pranayama videos there, as well as a lot of continuing education for yoga teachers that's coming up. So take full advantage of it. Okay. This is all free content and all it takes from you is a review and a subscribe and stuff like that. So yeah. Anyway, now I've gotten all my updates out of the way. Let's get to the show today. Hi, my name is Arundhati, and you're listening to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. I'm an ex-Bollywood dancer turned yoga and wellness educator. I've built a 6-figure business as an immigrant, woman of color yoga teacher with no business background, no handstands, pure instinct, and the free information found on Google. If you love doing yoga and you dream of teaching it someday, this podcast is for you. We go over everything from doing and teaching yoga to scaling a small business, living a modern yoga lifestyle, and so much more. You'll find interesting, fun, raw conversations along with some tips, tricks, strategies, and insights in this podcast. So grab your cup of chai and let's jump in. On the show today, I'm sharing my 7-step process to nailing asana sequencing. I have been teaching asana now for a decade, almost every day, if not every day, from beginner's asana to advanced asana to intermediate to adaptable asana. So sequencing is something that I have not only struggled with in the past, but I've also had to problem solve, because as my students grew when I started Aham Yoga, I needed to grow with them to keep them moving forward. And when you have a studio like mine, where you're the main teacher and everything in the studio depends on you moving forward, I had to kind of force myself to learn this and get really into it to figure out how to do this. Actually, all my yoga education largely happened in India because I lived there. I grew up there, right? I wasn't really spoon-fed how to sequence. I did, however, get very high quality yoga education for my level at that time. But sequencing is this obsession with sequencing, honestly, is a very Western approach in trainings. But sequencing, I got a little bit of sequencing here and there in my trainings, and I was so new that I had to still build my own practice to really understand the depths of sequencing. So after graduating and after starting Aham Yoga, I really worked towards clarifying my approach towards sequencing and what it meant to sequence, and noticing where my students were, where they were getting stuck, and finding ways around it. Okay. So what I'm sharing with you today is my 7-step process to break sequencing down into simple, easy, actionable steps. So I want you to grab a pen and paper or open up your notes app, because this is pretty straightforward and it's really effective and it works. Okay. So starting with Step 1. Step 1 is to pick a theme, a direction, or even a peak pose. Okay. The first step is getting clarity on what you're planning to teach as an overview, essentially an end goal for that day in class. Needless to say, this depends on your audience, okay? But for this conversation, I'm assuming that you know what a theme means, what a peak pose type of sequencing means, or a general direction for your asana classes means, okay? I think this is pretty standard in many teacher trainings, but if you haven't studied this, I do have some blogs that I've written, which I will link to in the show notes at letstalk.yoga/listen. Now, here are some examples to help you get more clarity, okay? A theme could be a particular topic that you are focusing on. For example, say the theme is posture enhancement or posture improvement or yoga asana for better posture. So that's one example. Now, secondly, if we talk about peak poses vary from person to person depending on their practice, their frequency, and their ability that day. Okay. It also depends on the caliber of the teacher's instruction and education. And again, what is a peak for you today is very different from what it is a peak for everyone else on another day. But for sake of this conversation, let's look at Ardha Hanumanasana as an example, half Hanuman's pose, okay, which is essentially a pose that will help you get more glute and hamstring flexibility, and it helps you to get a little further forward in Hanumanasana, okay. And then thirdly, if you are looking at a direction, right, say you are teaching a beginner's yoga asana class, then there is a certain direction you move in with beginner's yoga. Okay, so that's step 1, where you first pick a theme or a direction for your class, or even a peak pose depending on your audience. Okay, does that make sense? So that's the first step. Now, once you've identified the first step, you go to the next step. Okay, step 2 is identify the main components required for your peak, your theme, or your direction. Okay. Now, once you've done step 1, you will need to quickly identify what are the main components of your peak, your theme, or your direction. Now, let's take the same examples that we did from step 1. Now, in our theme, we spoke about posture enhancement, posture improvement, right? Yoga for better posture. So take a moment here. I'm going to pause for a few seconds. I want you to think of what are the main components required on the physical body to enhance posture. Okay, I'm going to say that again. What are the main components that you have to work on in your sequence to enhance someone's posture? If you need more time to think about this, just hit pause on this episode. But essentially, what helps one get better posture, right? You would move in the direction of shoulder opening or shoulder mobility work, okay? Chest opening and spinal extensions. Essentially, you're moving in the backward bending direction, okay? So identifying those main components for each of these is extremely important, okay? Now let's take the other example. Your peak pose was Ardha Hanumanasana, right? And Ardha Hanuman would demand, again, I'm going to pause here for a moment. What would a half forward split prep type of pose, what components, what muscles, what joints, what components do you work around? Okay. And take a moment here and just think of that. Okay, so Ardha Hanumanasana would demand a lot of glute stretch, hamstring stretch, some amount of external rotation, a little bit of hip flexor and quad stretch type of work, right? So identifying these is key. Okay, I hope this is making sense to you. If we were in a live training, this would just be so much easier because I know the audio medium has certain limitations. There are things I can show you visually that I cannot do in this podcast. So I'm hoping this makes sense. Now, thirdly, the next example, beginner's yoga. If your direction is a beginner's yoga class, for example, then depending on which number the class is in, okay, you want to give them either you want to cover the 6 fundamental movements or give them a bit of each category of yoga. Now, the 6 fundamental movements everybody should be doing every day are forward bending, back bending, side bending. Now, that's considered as 2, 3, and 4. So, side bending, twisting, okay, again, 2 sides. So that's 6 already. Okay. And I'd like to throw in one more here as a bonus, which is balance. Okay. So if you can give your beginner student or any student for that matter, these 6 fundamental movements every day in your sequence, that's a great direction to move in. All right. And these 6 fundamental movements, if you expand that into the yoga sequencing world, those are your category of poses, right? You've got standing poses. You want them to do standing poses, a couple of back bends, a couple of twists, at least a balance. Okay. You got forward bending in there. So there are these 6 fundamental movements as well as these groups of poses. So that's step 2, identifying the main components that you need to work to get closer to your theme, your peak, or your direction. Okay. Now, step 3. This is where it really starts gets really interesting. Step 3 is where you do a timed brain dump of your poses. Okay. I want you to think of this as one of the most important steps. I want you turn on a timer, say 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and you start to put a brain dump of poses. The poses you do a brain dump of are essentially, they should fit into the components you identified in step 2. This is very important. Okay. Don't skip this step. Don't rush through it. Most often yoga teachers will immediately start trying to build a sequence in the order itself that they want to teach it at. Right from the start. Now, this just makes it more confusing, and you end up taking way too much time trying to finish a sequence. But there is a better way. Okay. What you really want to do is put down a brain dump of poses for each component identified. Okay. I'm going to say that again. You want to put a brain dump of poses in no particular order for each component you've identified. For example, a moment ago, we were talking about posture enhancement, right? And that requires some shoulder opening, some spinal extension, some chest opening. So in your brain dump, you would have 3 groups. You would have shoulder opening, you would have chest opening, and then you would have spinal extension. Now, under shoulder opening, you would put a brain dump of poses that you can think of that mobilize your shoulders, that improve the health of your shoulders, right? And then in chest opening, you would write a few more poses. Now they may overlap, and that's fine. You'll write a few other poses that are more back bend in nature. Then you'd add some back strength work in there. So essentially, under each group, you put a brain dump of the best poses you can think of and put it on paper. So it's out of your mind and you put it on paper. And this is the hardest part of your sequencing here, but it is the most important part. Okay. And if you get to here, the rest of your work in sequencing starts to simplify itself. Okay. From there, you move to step 4. Now, step 4 is where you arrange the poses in a logical, thoughtful, and effective manner. Okay. Now, once you have completed your brain dump, now you stop that timer and you look at your poses and you start to put them in order. Against the brain dump list itself, I just put numbers. Okay. And this is what will give me the rough order of my sequence. Now, don't overthink this step too much. Okay. Just follow the order of intensity. You essentially go from mild to moderate to more intense in your sequencing. Okay. Now, when I say intense, it could also mean deeper opening. Okay. Don't necessarily think in terms of making someone work harder. Essentially, pose 1 of your sequence should add value or enhance pose 2 in some way. Pose 1 and pose 2 together should enhance pose 3, and so on and so forth. Now, this is so important and so significant and central to sequencing that these step 3 and 4, the brain dump and arranging your poses in a logical manner, they can make or break your sequences over time. Okay, so don't take this lightly. Spend a lot of time in these 2 steps. The thing with this 7-step process that I'm sharing is the more you do it, the better you get at it. Okay. The initial legwork with sequencing is very high, but as you do it, it's a skill that gets better with time and you will get more efficient and faster in this. Okay. Now it's time to move on to step 5. You have your order ready at this point. Okay. You've done the brain dump, you've organized it. Now step 5 is you need to skim the sequence and see where you would need potential options. For example, do you have cues for lower back issues in your sequences? What if someone has wrist issues? Do you at all need counter poses? And I'm hoping you've studied these in your trainings. Otherwise, this would be a little difficult for you to understand in this conversation. Do you have skillful prop options, effective prop options, and any other modifications that you need? What if a pregnant person shows up in class, right? So what I'm trying to make you understand in this is you don't have to essentially do it all at once. You want to segregate your thought process this way, and it will allow you to think more clearly in pockets here, in moments here. Otherwise, what happens with most new asana teachers, we just get overwhelmed, right? And we try to do everything in a perfect order and we build these sequences. And sometimes you take 5 hours to prepare for 1 hour of asana class. Okay. But this is the better way. Okay, so step 5 is to check for counter poses, modifications, and any other conditions. All right. Step 6 is practice what you have created. Step 6 is practice what you have created. Now, you've heard me say this. You've heard the guests say this. Yoga is an embodied practice. So please make sure you practice your sequence more than a few times. You will notice that you will get feedback from your own sequence. Okay. And you might want to incorporate that in your sequence. Maybe it's a transition. Maybe it's a pose that needs to be replaced with another pose. Maybe you have to change pose number 3 to make it pose number 5, and pose number 5 is better as pose number 3. But essentially, you put your sequence to test. Okay. It's just like how a chef would taste his dish before sending it out. You do the same thing. You test it on more than once a day. You don't sit on your table initially and just build these sequences to create a fancy sequence. You've got to really do it a few times and be fully present in your sequence. Okay. And You essentially want to be so in tune with your sequence that it's like your second nature. And usually most people feel like there's a disconnect between that piece of paper that has the sequence and them, right? And they need that piece of paper to remember the sequence. But if you really practice your sequences and you really are fully present and you embody your sequences, the modifications, the counters, all the conditions, then it becomes muscle memory. I would say even beyond muscle memory, just second nature. That way you can be fully present when you offer it to someone else. Okay. Again, remember the initial legwork for sequencing is pretty high. But once you master this 7-step process, you will definitely get better at sequencing. I'm also assuming that your teacher training that you've done was decent enough to help you get here. Okay. And now step 7. Okay. Step 7, something I have skipped for many years. So I'm making sure I include it here so that you don't make the same mistakes I do. All right. Step 7 is to document it. Okay. Step 7, your final step, is to document it. Once you've arrived at a good sequence that you've made, document it somewhere where it's permanent, not a piece of paper on your way to asana class or even on your notes app on your phone, because too much happens on your phone, at least for me. Okay. But you want to have it in this clear, well thought out folder digitally or a book. I'm still honestly, I write my sequences down till date, but you want to save it somewhere digital, because what if you lose the book? Right? And once you have that specialized sequences, you've spent so much time, energy, enough effort to get to those, right? And you want to save them so you can use them in the weeks ahead, in the months ahead. You will have plenty of sequences if you keep building them, and you don't have to keep recreating it each time. Okay. So step 7 is to document it digitally, document it somewhere where it's permanent. And you can even go back and change these sequences and see your own growth. And over time, you'll notice there are many different ways to get to the same pose, to get to the same theme, and you can have a variety. And what you're doing is essentially curating an experience for your students. Okay. Through asana, you're bringing them deeper into their practice. And that is so rewarding for them. And it's rewarding for you as a student. I can absolutely say with confidence that that's how I've built Aham Yoga up, right? Through beginners, teaching them what to do, slowly taking them to the next thing and then the next thing and the next thing. While I really didn't document a lot of it in the early years, it's something that I wish I had done. So I didn't keep going back and recreating these sequences. Okay. So there you have it, my friend, my 7-step process to asana sequencing for any class. Now, here's a quick recap of your 7 steps. First, you pick a theme, a peak pose, or a direction for your class. Step 2, you identify the main components that you need to work to get to the theme, peak, or direction. Step 3, you do a timed brain dump of these poses. Step 4, you arrange these poses in a logical, thought out manner using this principle. Step 5, you check for counter poses, modifications, and any other conditions. Step 6, you practice your sequence a few times and you make changes as needed. Step 7, you document it digitally and save it for eternity. So I hope this serves you well. And I also hope that whatever I offer you here on the podcast just helps you get a little better at your own yoga and makes you more connected to it. And remember, we only scratch the surface of these conversations on the show. If you're looking to go deeper and get more understanding, you can always study with the guests who appear on this training. You can also study with me through these online courses. You can get mentored in the Mindful Yoga Teachers Club. I have a new training called Teaching Yoga to Beginners that I was talking about earlier, which starts in June and goes a lot in depth in this 7-step process and more. You can practice live with me at the studio, my YouTube channel. There's a lot that I do in the yoga world. So make sure you take full advantage of it. Okay. But jokes apart, I hope you enjoyed this show. I hope you found value in this 7-step process. Please remember to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That's really what moves the needle for us. And remember, this is just free yoga education coming to you every week. So please take a moment to support it in whatever way you can. I'll be back next week with another guest, another conversation. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.